Welcome to my weekly China Lens, and this week we're going to cover the topic about the risks that China is facing and that could impact its future and economy. So what is the biggest risk for China? Could China still fail? And if they would, what would be the reason? Why? And would the Communist Party one day be replaced by a more democratic system? It's a topic for the past 30 years that I've been hearing constantly every year, lots of articles written about it, on why China will fail. And I want to cover some of these topics. And I think there's 5 internal risks that China has, and 2 big external. And there's many more, of course. But the biggest one, in my view, that we talk about in the West very often is the biggest debt that China has. 300% of GDP, a huge amount of debt. But I don't think that's going to be such a big problem. I mean, it is big, but most of it is internal debt because of savings that Chinese have more than any country in the world. And so China will be able to manage that debt as long as people keep saving. And the other thing is that it's also, China has a system where the financial markets are kind of controllable by the government, which is very different from the West, where often it's the capital or the rich people or the rich companies that are controlling policy. And in China, it's the other way around. The second thing is state-owned enterprises. And if we look at them, there's like 150,000 of them, then what we see is that their productivity level is quite low. And so maybe that could not help China to become a developed country. They have 40% of the national assets. So this is like subsidies and lots of things we talk about in the West that China's not doing very well. But I see this productivity going up every single year. And there's also a good thing about state-owned enterprise, which we never talk about, is the fact that they can balance the long-term vision or long-term plan with short-term profits, which we can't in the West. And in COVID-19, balancing, for example, healthcare or employment or the environment for short-term gains is maybe not such a bad thing. So I think China will be able to manage that. The other thing is the real estate bubble. It's going to explode or it's going to burst. That's what everybody's always saying. But on the other hand, I think most Chinese don't have a big problem with that because 90% of the Chinese own their own house. And so there's no need to have a second or a third house. And China's been investing a lot into affordable houses outside of the cities and then have the high-speed trains for people to go inside the cities. But it's true that in Shanghai, an apartment is more expensive than an apartment in New York. So it is a problem. Now, the fourth thing, in my view, is the GDP growth that is going down. And that's clear. Every year it's been going down from more than 10% to 6% last year. Now, of course, with COVID-19, 2%, but next year is probably going to be around 5-6%. So it's going down every year. And so China needs to change its priorities from investment into consumption. And this is happening, especially now Chinese can't travel, they're consuming more inside China. It has to open its market instead of subsidizing industries and having closed markets and having unfair competition. This is happening too, maybe not as fast as we want to, but it is happening. And then they have to become more independent because otherwise they are dependent on the rest of the world. The fifth thing, in my view, which is a big risk in China, maybe the biggest, is actually the social unrest. It's social stability, which Chinese government is obsessed with, has always been. And that's why we have all these discussions about human rights. Hong Kong and Xinjiang and other places is because China does things differently because they're worried about social unrest. And I think COVID-19 has shown that there's 3 new things happening, or at least 2. One is that unemployment. Migrants came back to work after the pandemic in Q2. They didn't find their same jobs or couldn't earn the same amount of money. A lot of people didn't find a job at all. Big problem. Tens or maybe 100 million people, migrants, stranded. Then there's the thing of inequality. The richer are gotten richer, the poor a little bit less poor, but the inequality has grown. So that's also not good for stability of the country. And then there's the thing of nationalism, and I think that's the biggest issue. Chinese have become extremely nationalist, and this has been caused by the external aggression, in a way, against China, specifically from Trump and the US. And so China's nationalism is not a very good thing. It isn't good anywhere in the world because it creates these polarization tensions. And that's what could actually have a problem when it comes to stability of the country. So the government, I mean, in a way, it's good to have nationalism, so they support the government, on the other hand, or the party. On the other hand, it's not good because they have more problems to control the people that are nationalist. So this is the internal. Externally, the exports and trade is the biggest one. That's why we had this trade war, and with COVID-19, we're talking about decoupling. I wrote a whole blog about it on pascalcoppens.com. You can read it. And there you see that I don't believe the West will decouple from China very fast. It's going to happen very, very slowly. And the reason is the market in China is very big. The investment that China did as factories is huge in the ecosystem, and much more you can read about in that blog. But I don't believe decoupling is in the agenda. So I don't think it's going to happen. So the last thing I think is a risk externally is actually the geopolitical tensions between the US and China. And that is really something that is very fragile, especially when we look at technology and innovation attacks that US is doing, banning Huawei, TikTok, the whole story, and WeChat, and also SMIC, the big microelectronics producer or chip manufacturing in China, not being able to do business from America or get components from America. Big issue because it kind of slows down the Chinese growth in innovation. So that's a risk. But then there's also the military part. South China Sea, there's Taiwan. And my personal biggest concern today is that Taiwan would end up in a real war. We've seen just a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, that there was a government official from the US visiting Taiwan. This is a no-go. That's something that no other country dares to do, because there's a kind of silent agreement between the world and China that Taiwan belongs to China, and as long as nobody claims independence of Taiwan, then ultimately China will not invade or try to take Taiwan back. But if somebody does, and that seems to be the direction of the US going, then China could actually take back that island. And that is very likely if we continue driving up the tensions. So I'm very worried about the combination of nationalism and a Taiwan or South China Sea military action that maybe is a miscalculation and suddenly has everything explode. The result would be that the whole world would look at China as even more evil than they look at it today, and that would make China or put China in more self-isolation again. And it may take a few years to recover from that, but it wouldn't be good for China, wouldn't be good for the world. But this is the biggest risk in my view. If you want to get more insights and details on this Cold War that is building up, you can go to nocoldwar.org, a website full of resources and video about what's really happening. And of course, my blog on pascalcoppens.com about decoupling of China will also give you some insights. And I hope to see you all next week on another episode of Pascal's China Lens.